March Madness. Hopefully you got your bracket filled out. Are you happy with the number ones? We'll be talking about all of that with my man Blake Cockrum. He writes for a website, keepingithill.com. Shout out to, I think, Shelly Q. I did say that already. Appreciate you for tuning in. But my man Blake Cockrum has been in the mix for a while with Keeping It Hill. So we are diehard Tar Heels fan. We're going to talk about the disappointment of losing against Duke in the ACC tournament. But the NCAA tournament is now going to be kicking off on Wednesday with the play-in games. Then also we'll have, Thursday and Friday, the two biggest nights of college basketball. March Madness is officially here. But let me know if you guys got your bracket filled out. Who do you have winning it? Duke is looking great. I do think they're going to get upset by a more experienced team, though. All right, next up on the line, we got Blake Cockrum, writer, editor of keepingithill.com. How's it going, Blake?
Going good, Ben. How you doing?
Good, man. Great to get you back on the show, and it's perfect timing because it's our favorite time of the year. I know, especially yours being a writer of college basketball, but it's March Madness time. But first, before we get into that, I do want to talk about the ACC tournament. Duke and North Carolina was on Friday. I was excited to watch it. I was off, so I was at home, able to be plugged in. And then Zion happened again. But I want to tell me what your thoughts was when Kobe White missed that shot, and then Nasir Little trying to tap it in, but it didn't work out.
I think it was two things. I think it was bad shot selection. I think it was a play that was somewhat discombobulated and a little bit sloppy. But I also think it was good defense. I rewatched the play, and Duke had Kobe White's sort of typical lane cut off pretty well. I think he's pretty opportunistic. He's pretty smart. I think if he would have seen a lane, he would have gone in for two. So everybody was crying and shouting about why he didn't go to the bucket. But I think Duke's defense on that play was pretty good. I think maybe we could have called a timeout and prepared something a little better. But I'm not upset that he didn't call a timeout because Roy's history pretty much speaks for itself. He's been pretty successful, so I'm not going to question it at this point. As far as Zion goes, I think it's just one of those things that, if you can let Zion do his damage and pretty much stop the rest of the team, I think you're usually going to be in a pretty good position. And I think that game really validated the other two wins because, even with Zion playing, they only won by one on a neutral court with North Carolina having a chance to win the game at the end. If that shot goes in, and it wasn't super far off, it was he got a decent look. It wasn't the best, but he got pretty close, and Little had a chance to knock it in. So, I don't think that you can be that upset about that game. And obviously the committee wasn't super upset or appalled by it either because they still ended up getting the 1 seed.
Right. And it was, I believe they already had it set. It was just a matter of them announcing it. So I don't know if that game did or did not play a factor. But Kobe White has been, especially the second half of the season, has been really spot on for this team. And Cameron Johnson, I'm blown away. I didn't know this is what we were getting when he came onto this team, but he has completely proven to me what his worth.
Yeah. So in terms of the seeding, I think that the biggest help for North Carolina was Kentucky losing early. Had Kentucky won the SEC tournament, I am 90% certain that Kentucky would have gotten in there as a 1. Since they lost when they did, I think that kind of sewed it up. And we obviously sort of saw that because even though Michigan State ran the table, it didn't help them any. It helped them move up the 2 line a little bit, but I think they were on the 2 line regardless. But somehow they moved up to the first 2 seed, and then they got stuck with Duke, which was a little bit peculiar to me. And then obviously we saw that Tennessee, I think, had a shot but got absolutely obliterated. And I don't think even if Tennessee wins that game over Auburn that they get a 1 seed. So I think Kentucky losing was the biggest deal. Kobe White has been absolutely phenomenal. I think he has helped shed the stigma at North Carolina that Roy doesn't, A, play freshmen, and B, doesn't help them excel. Because Kobe White has done both. He's gotten a ton of minutes, obviously been starting the entire season. He's had a green light from virtually day one, and he's been an absolute star. He's maybe arguably the best guard in the country all around. Now, he's not the best defensive guard, but I think without question, he is the best offensive guard in the country. I think the only other guard that might be an all-around better player is Cassius Winston with Michigan State, because he's terrific too. Yeah. And I also think, as a side note for next year, I think that Kobe White has solidified the Cole Anthony commitment that I think we'll see here in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Because of those reasons that I said, Cole Anthony now at this point knows that if he can play, Roy's going to let him play. And he's going to get a lot of minutes, and there's going to be an opening for him to take over where Kobe White will likely be gone, because at this point, Kobe White doesn't have much to prove at the college level in terms of draft stock. Coming back, in my estimation, as much as I'd love to see him in a Carolina uniform another year, coming back will probably only hurt his draft stock, because it's going to be hard to match what he's done this year, and the expectations will be inevitably high if he comes back. And speaking about another guy that's going to play in the NBA very soon is Cameron Johnson. Cameron Johnson, when he decided he was going to transfer from Pittsburgh, and the moment I saw his name, I was like, this is the guy that we need to get. Wasn't sure if we were going to be able to, because initially he was blocked from going to North Carolina, but he thought that, and it was obviously a good day when he committed. But I expected good things. I didn't expect maybe this great of things, because he's been nothing short of fantastic. And if it wasn't for him on this team, there's absolutely no way North Carolina would be a 1 seed and be where they are right now. They wouldn't have been co-champions of the ACC. Before Kobe White became as consistent as he's been lately, it was Cameron Johnson that really was the most consistent player on the team, and still is. Percentage-wise, he's the second best shooter in the ACC behind DeAndre Hunter. He has been terrific, and I think he's a great character guy. He's a great team guy. He's a great leader, and he's a guy, honestly, Cam Reddish is going to get drafted, I assume, way before Cameron Johnson, but I think they're sort of the same type player. Reddish is a little more athletic, and he'll get drafted higher on potential. But in terms of a player in the NBA, Cameron Johnson is going to fly under the radar. I think he's going to be a pretty good NBA player.
Yeah, he's ready now. Shout out to Chief Rocca. Thank you for tuning in. Comment here, Mochi says, White is still hard to watch out there sometimes. Yeah, man, part of it's probably got to be the hair. But I do think he is fast. I would kind of compare him to Ty Lawson with the speed, because Ty Lawson was able to just run up and down the court so quickly. By the time you got over there to him, he was already gone. He was already laying it up while you were still trying to turn around. But he is definitely going to be top 5. He's projected right now number 5 going to Atlanta. So he solidified his spot. Any questions on if he was leaving? There's definitely no questions right now. There won't be any, going forward. But I wanted to go to the bracket now. And you mentioned this pre-show that Kansas, who is number 4, has a possibility to play North Carolina basically in a home game once they get to that level. And I thought that was interesting also.
Okay, so this to me is a very, I don't know, we deal with this subject every year of the NCAA committee and how they choose teams, how they choose seeds, how they choose locations. And the NCAA selection committee continues to claim that the members don't look at matchups. They only look at locations involved in placing teams, in their respective regions. So to them, you obviously want to place a 1 or a 2 seed closer to their natural region and things like that, giving them the benefit of having a great season and a lot of wins. So where this becomes very odd is every single year we see these matchups that we're like, that's an interesting matchup because this, and there's a storyline on there. Well, it's become very, very obvious that there's way too many storylines to be accidental or unintentional. And this year, for example, there's a laundry list of them. One of them is how, Richard Pitino in Minnesota are playing a first round game against Louisville, his father's former school, and if it was just that, in the vacuum, we'd say, okay, coincidence, that's all it is. But we see these things year in and year out. Another one is, how Mike Krzyzewski and Johnny Dawkins could potentially meet up. That's another one where former Duke guys, or obviously a current Duke coach and then a former Duke player. How about the Roy Williams going against Kansas again for the umpteenth time? Right. It's like, when can we let this die? Because let's be real, the guys that are on this Kansas team were literally infants when Roy decided to come back to North Carolina. I don't know when we can at some point let this die, but he's now been in Chapel Hill longer than he was at Kansas. And it's literally been some of these kids' entire lifetime since he left. Another one is obviously the Elite Eight potential rematch of Kentucky and North Carolina. Another one that I noticed, obviously automatically, was the first round where you see Murray State and Marquette, where you've got two of the best scorers in the country in Marcus Howard and John Morant, and they're going to be facing off against each other in the first round. So I just think a lot of these things are obviously put together, they're manufactured, manifested because somebody's like, that would be really cool to see that happen. And I think there's just too many of them every single year to be a coincidence.
Yeah, and it's that in sports now that there has to be a storyline. They're not only going to say it's a storyline, they're going to force the storyline on you. And you're going to be like, okay, we get it. Okay, we see this as being another storyline again. And that is really what sports as a whole has really ended up being. But let's go to the seeding. Gonzaga number 1, Duke number 1, Virginia and North Carolina. I've said this so many times, and I wanted to get your opinion. Glad that you're on the show. I'm okay with Gonzaga being number 1, but you can't trust Gonzaga. They have made it to the championship game, 2 times, probably in the past, I would say 15 years or so. But can you trust Gonzaga? That's a question I put out there to the chat room too. Why can you trust Gonzaga, no matter if they're number 1 or not?
Are we comparing them to what we think a number 1 seed should do in an NCAA tournament? Is that what we can trust them by?
Yes.
Well, I have a hard time discounting them too much because, it wasn't too long ago that we, watched North Carolina beat them by 6 points in a title game. And with about 2 minutes left, they were leading. That game, a couple different things go a couple different ways. And you're talking about Mark Few is now, a national champion head coach, and the Gonzaga has gotten over the hump. For me personally, I don't know how much they have to do to prove that they're the real thing because, let's just look at the last 5 years. The last 5 years. Okay, so we don't know what they're going to do this year, but they were a number 1 seed to begin the tournament, so they've obviously had a good season. But a year ago, they were a Sweet 16 team. The year before that, they were the national runner-up. The year before that, Sweet 16. The year before that, Elite 8. Without looking back, I don't think that Duke, other than Duke winning in 2015, I don't know that Duke's resume in the tournament over the last 4 or 5 years is any better than that. Is Duke legitimate as a number 1? So, my problem with discounting them is that they've been there. They've won some games. They even got to a title game and had a chance to win that in the closing minutes. So, if they get knocked out in the first round this year, then maybe we're like, man, that they weren't that good. But then are we saying that about Virginia? And Virginia last year was the very first one to ever lose to a 16, but we're not saying that about them.
Right. True.
So until Gonzaga just somehow, really impresses me, to a point where they're not competing with the big teams out there, I'm not going to, give them this, the small conference discount because somehow they are playing in a lesser conference and still managing to also play big-time competition and compete with them. Now, North Carolina did kind of throttle them earlier in the season, but you'll also remember that Gonzaga beat Duke, who is that number 1 overall.
Wait, did I lose you?
Are you still there, Ben?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. But yeah, you know, I mean, Gonzaga has played teams. You know, they lost to North Carolina, like I